Well, thank you very much, Chairman, and thank you to the organiser of the event for inviting the APA to come and take part. And you obviously, Chairman, put your finger on the issue which is particularly exercising police authorities at this time. But before getting into that, just to say, as the bio in the pamphlet says, I'm a member of the Devon and Cornwall Police Authority. That's how I find my way to the Association of Police Authorities, and I lead the Liberal Democrat members on the APA Council. Colleagues, I'm sure, are aware that police authorities are made up of local councillors and independent members, and have been constituted this way since about the mid-1990s. And we're charged with securing an efficient and effective local police service, informing the policing plan with the public's priorities, and holding the police service to account, and appointing and just occasionally dismissing chief officers and their teams. Interestingly enough, this was set up by one Michael Howard back in the mid-90s. At the national level, the APA represents the 43 police authorities in England and Wales and seeks to influence national policing policy in the public interest, drawing on our experiences of listening closely to communities across England and Wales. And on that point, just perhaps ask colleagues here in the audience just to think about the geography of the area I come from, Devon and Cornwall, just how large that is. Population is about 1.7 million people, spread over a very long area. The police headquarters is in Exeter, which is in the east of the area, and it can take you on a bad day in the summertime something like 4 to 5 hours to drive from the police headquarters in Exeter down to the far west of Cornwall. It's a very, very large geographic area, and I make that point to simply inform the debate about elected police commissioners. Just think of one individual trying to cover such a landmass, because I can assure you local communities are very diverse in that part of the country, and I'm sure it's the case in other parts of the country as well, and they will expect their own time with the directly elected police commissioner if that's where we get to. And when you think about it, we've got 43 police authorities covering England and Wales. I learned the other day that in the United States, okay, the United States is rather larger in population, rather larger in landmass, but they've got some 17,000 different police enforcement agencies in the United States. So if the government think that we have a problem, they really do need to reflect on what the situation is in the United States. Because after all, I think it's no state secret that this idea of directly elected police commissioners was an idea that came to David Cameron on a visit to the United States before he became Prime Minister, and he obviously thinks it's the finest thing since sliced bread. Anyway, the serious points that I've been asked to talk about, the structural reform on police governance, outlined in the Police Reform and Social Responsibility Bill, and whether this can deliver an improved and more efficient police service, how these reforms might help police authorities to meet the needs of local communities and restore the link between people and the police, and what impact will directly elected commissioners have on the police service, and how will the costs be considered given the very acute fiscal pressures we're now facing in our country, which we, I think, all understand, even if we don't like the medicine, to put it right, and I think we all understand, you know, but for the grace of God, we may be going the way of Ireland if we didn't tackle this issue. So trying to address these points, Chairman, as the former policing minister, who I'm very pleased to see here, because actually he was a police minister who did listen, and we had some very serious engagements with him from the APA over the question of police mergers, and eventually the government of the day listened. They also listened to the idea because at one time the previous government had some ideas about directly elected police commissioners to run the police governance in the country, and eventually I think the arguments we put forward, the arguments others put forward, were listened to, and they decided to drop the idea. I certainly am doing the same with people in the government, obviously, which I am a supporter of. After a sustained period of investment and growth in police budgets over the previous decade, unlike other core services of health and education now facing either a standstill or an increase in their spending, just a little increase, the police service is looking at something like 14 to 20% cuts over the CSR period. Now that, you know, we can argue about whether it's a net effect or the gross effect. Nevertheless, it's a very substantial turnaround from where we have been. And during those times of relative plenty, police authorities have been still delivering efficiency savings. There's nothing new about this, you know, though the government seemed to be saying that's, you know, will flow through from these directly elected commissioners. And I think we've achieved something like 30% in terms of efficiencies over the last 10 years. So police authorities are no strangers to this, and we'll get most out of the settlement figures we get that we can. And certainly in the case of Devon and Cornwall, where I come from, we were able, through a combination of tax rises and efficiency improvements, we were able to increase our number of police officers from 2,800 to 3,500, plus recruiting 350 PCSOs. Now that's made a huge difference in our part of the world, particularly when you take the geography into account. But I don't suppose any of us who currently are involved in the governance of policing have ever actually experienced cuts of the 14 to 20% magnitude which is on the table at the moment. And this issue of front-loading of the cuts, which was referred to a few minutes ago, certainly the APA are fighting this battle, because there was some suggestion in the local government press a couple of weeks ago that Eric Pickles was going to try and get this changed as far as local government is concerned. Well, police authorities, in terms of its funding, are not unlike local authorities, and if that's going to happen there, then certainly we want to see it happen for police service, because if we can have a smoother run into the level of cutbacks over the 4 years, we'll actually, I think, avoid some of the worst impacts of it, and also make the money go further. But already mentioned, Chairman, this informed assessment by the HMIC about cuts, where they say cuts beyond 12% cannot fail to affect what is misleadingly called the front line. I prefer to call it visible policing. Wherever you draw that line, there's going to be a meaningful cut, because slightly departing from the script, just to repeat that point, the police service is a 24/7 service. Local authorities and other public agencies will be cutting back on their spending, but who will be there to pick up the pieces? The police. And there's no use saying, oh, that's not a policing matter, Mrs. X. You know, you must talk to social services on Monday morning. At the end of the day, the public will expect the police to respond in whatever way they can. And I know officers in the part of the world that I represent most certainly do their best to achieve that. And for that reason, you know, I would say the relationship between police officers and the communities they serve are actually stronger today than they ever have been. So it's somewhat of a surprise exemption from the list of core services which the Conservatives designated having protected budgets. Health and education, of course, have substantially escaped the axe. But the one thing we are sharing in the police service and police governance world with other core services is the prospects of reform. Free schools, the abolition of primary care trusts, all promised a significant shake-up of health and education. But the proposed policing reforms announced by the Home Secretary last week in detail really go even further than that. It's a fundamental constitutional shift. For a very long time, we've had what we call the tripart relationship between the Home Office, the police service, and police authorities. And okay, you can always complain about any system, but I would argue very strongly that they've actually worked quite well. Yes, there's no reason, as the previous police minister said, that we could not seek to improve upon the way we do our business, but it ain't broken. As someone who's worked in the American manufacturing industry for 23 years, you learn very quickly that if it ain't broke, you don't fix it. And I think essentially the tripart system ain't broke and doesn't need fixing in the radical way which the government are proposing, especially at this time of severe cutback in public finances. Yep, there are good things in the bill, there are always good things in most bills. And certainly as a Liberal Democrat, I do support the proposal for direct elections, but not directly elected commissioners having all the power in their hands. Because there was a difference, and I'm just disappointed that didn't feed through into the coalition agreement between the position of the Liberal Democrats at the general election on this police governance issue and the Conservatives. The Conservative recipe was very clear. Directly elected police commissioners, all powerful, would sort out the bad, ineffective chief constables and the police service. Liberal Democrat perspective was directly elected people to police authorities would still remain in being, but they would be more than one person responsible for the governance of policing. And there's been plenty of evidence up and down the country that police authorities can be very effective and deal with difficult issues in terms of chief officers when the need arises. We don't go around shouting, oh yes, we can sack chief constables. That's not what we're there for. We're there to achieve the effective and efficient policing of the area for the public who live in that area. So evidence, one thing my colleagues who signed up to the coalition agreement said that all proposals would be evidence-based. Well, I still haven't seen anything from the police minister or the Home Secretary which I call a business plan. and being an accountant, having worked in manufacturing industry, I'm pretty familiar with these sort of things. I would have expected a fully costed business plan, which first of all would set out why change is needed, what the benefits of change would be, what the cost implications would be, and what are the risks associated with it. I still haven't seen it. I've asked this question of Nick Herbert many times, and I think last time I asked it, there was some admission that something like this was needed, but I still haven't seen any details.